Shalom, shalom, shalom. Welcome to Bible Learners Corner, in which we translate scriptures into pictures. We are going to analyze several scriptures talking about warfare. We have natural warfare. We also have spiritual warfare. And for we do not wrestle against flesh and blood, but against principalities, against powers, against the rulers of the darkness of this age, against the spiritual hosts of wickedness in the heavenly places. We'll go through the book of Isaiah, chapter 40, the book of 2 Corinthians, chapter 10, the book of 1 Timothy, chapter 1, also 2 Timothy, chapter 2, the book of Ephesians, chapter 6, and finally, the book of Deuteronomy, chapter 20, talking about the principles governing warfare. The Bible, in the book of 2 Corinthians, talks about the weapons of our warfare that are not carnal, but mighty in God for pulling down strongholds. In this life, humanity faces so many troubles and challenges that are in the natural, but one thing mankind needs to understand is that behind everything that manifests in the flesh, anything that comes in the natural, has its source, it has its root, it has its origin in the supernatural, that is, the spiritual. Anything that comes in the natural has its source in the spirit. For though we walk in the flesh, we do not war according to the flesh. For the weapons of our warfare are not carnal, but mighty in God for pulling down strongholds, casting down arguments and every high thing that exalts itself against the knowledge of God, bringing every thought into captivity to the obedience of Christ, and being ready to punish all disobedience when your obedience is fulfilled. The book of Isaiah chapter 40, the Holy Bible says, God's people are comforted. Isaiah chapter 40, starting from verse 1. Comfort, yes, comfort my people, says your God. Speak comfort to Jerusalem and cry out to her that her warfare is ended, that her iniquity is pardoned, for she has received from the Lord's hand double for all her sins. The voice of one crying in the wilderness, prepare the way of the Lord, make straight in the desert a highway for our God. Every valley shall be exalted, and every mountain hill brought low. The crooked places shall be made straight, and the rough places smooth. The glory of the Lord shall be revealed, and all flesh shall see it together. For the mouth of the Lord has spoken. The book of Isaiah, chapter 40, talking about God's people being comforted. The book of Deuteronomy, chapter 20, talks about the principles governing warfare. Deuteronomy chapter 20, starting from verse 1. When you go out to battle against your enemies, and see horses and chariots, and people more numerous than you, do not be afraid of them, for the Lord your God is with you, who brought you up from the land of Egypt. So it shall be, when you are on the verge of battle, that the priest shall approach and speak to the people. And he shall say to them, Hear, O Israel, today you are on the verge of battle with your enemies. Do not let your heart faint. Do not be afraid, and do not tremble or be terrified because of them. For the Lord your God is he who goes with you to fight for you against your enemies to save you. Deuteronomy chapter 20, talking about the warfare. Also, in the book of 2 Corinthians, verse 7, do you look at things according to the outward appearance? Paul asks. If anyone is convinced in himself that he is Christ, let him again consider this in himself, that just as he is Christ, even so we are Christ's. The book of 1 Timothy, chapter 1, the Holy Bible, talks about warfare. 1 Timothy, chapter 1, verse 18, Paul talks about fighting the good fight. Paul says, This charge I commit to you, son Timothy, according to the prophecies previously made concerning you, that by them you may wage the good warfare, having faith and a good conscience. Which some, having rejected concerning the faith, have suffered shipwreck. Paul talking about fighting the good fight of faith in the book of 1 Timothy chapter 1. In 2 Timothy chapter 2, Paul talking about warfare. 2 Timothy chapter 2, starting from verse 1. You therefore, my son, be strong in the grace that is in Christ Jesus. And the things that you have heard from me among many witnesses, commit this to faithful men who will be able to teach it others also. You therefore must endure hardship as a good soldier of Jesus Christ. No one engaged in warfare entangles himself with the affairs of this life, that he may please him who enlisted him as a soldier. Paul talking about putting on the whole armor of God. Paul talking about the whole armor of God. In verse 10 of the book of Ephesians chapter 6 verse 10, Paul talking about the whole armor of God. Finally, my brethren, be strong in the Lord and in the power of his might. Put on the whole armor of God, that you may be able to stand against the wiles of the devil. For we do not wrestle against flesh and blood, but against principalities, against powers, against the rulers of the darkness of this age, against the spiritual hosts of wickedness in the heavenly places. Therefore, take up the whole armor of God, that you may be able to withstand in the evil day, and having done all, to stand. The book of Ephesians chapter 6 talks about the principalities and the warfare. We thank you for joining us in the ongoing discussion, warfare, the spiritual warfare, comparing natural things and spiritual things. We have natural warfare, we also have spiritual warfare. Analyzing the scriptures, Ephesians chapter 6, the book of Deuteronomy chapter 20, Isaiah chapter 40, 2 Corinthians chapter 10, 1 Timothy chapter 1, 2 Timothy chapter 2. Going through the related verses, we'll see that there are natural battles just as there are spiritual battles. Natural warfare and spiritual warfare. We ask you to continue listening to the discussion as we talk about comparing natural things and spiritual